Good Tuesday evening, fight fans, and welcome to the latest edition of the Combat Press Midweek Report. I'm your host, Eric Reiner, staff writer for CombatPress.com, joined as usual by 6'5" of hockey fighting mastery, Riley Contact. How's it going, Riley?
It's going good, man. Just looking forward to talking about some MMA here.
Yeah, dude. As always, this has become a highlight of my week, to be perfectly honest with you.
It's the only thing I have going on ever.
I pretty much can't talk to anybody else in my life about MMA because they just look at me sideways. So this is a nice weekly break from...
I thought you were going to say because they're not as intellectual as me. That works, though.
Well, that too. I was about to say that.
Oh, okay.
Go to CombatPress.com, ladies and gentlemen, for all the latest news, opinions, and interviews in the world of mixed martial arts. We just put out our latest series of men's rankings. I know Riley does a monthly women's rankings that should be coming out sometime in, I would imagine, late September, early October for the month of October.
1st of October.
1st of October. Check back in a couple of weeks for that. I had a piece today, self-promotion, but yeah, all of the great writers on CombatPress.com, check that out every day for all the latest in the world of mixed martial arts. Thanks to Brian Henderson and Rob Tatum for keeping this show on the air. Speaking of Brian Henderson, he and Vince Carey did a fantastic preview of the upcoming UFC Fight Night Hunt versus Nelson event that I encourage all of you to check out before that event takes place this weekend. Again, you can check that out at combatpress.com. We, meaning Riley and myself, are going to preview that very event, Hunt versus Nelson, coming up on this program. We're also going to recap last weekend's Fight Night Silva versus Arlovsky event. We will talk about the Ultimate Fighter 20. Of course, the season premiere was last week, Wednesday. The show continues weekly on Wednesdays at 10 Eastern Time on Fox Sports 1. And touch on a couple of other brief tidbits in the world of mixed martial arts. Once again, a reminder, go to CombatPress.com for all the latest news and whatnot in the world of MMA. CombatPress.com. And I'm going to say it a bunch more times later in the show. So, let's talk about last weekend's UFC Fight Night event from Brasilia, Brazil, headlined by Bigfoot Silva taking on Andrei Arlovsky. Somewhat of a surprising, to some perhaps, main event result, with Arlovsky taking care of business against Bigfoot Silva, knocking him out in the very first round. He kind of put him down with some straight punches and then finished the job with hammer fist before the referee stepped in. Very impressive performance by Arlovsky. Riley, where does this... I mean, we obviously see where this leaves Arlovsky. I believe he's now ranked 6th or 7th in the UFC's heavyweight division after his win over Bigfoot Silva. But where is his ceiling at this point? Because we've seen his flaws, but we've also seen some fairly recent successes from Arlovsky.
For him, I think the sky's the limit. I mean, if you think, the UFC heavyweight division is very, very bottom heavy. There's not a lot of guys that are floating towards the top of the title picture. So you look at a guy like him, and he's on a big run right now. I think he's like 11-1 in his last 12 or something like that, or something close to that. So, I think that if he keeps winning, especially like he did against Bigfoot, he's not that far away from a title shot, especially considering there's not a bunch of guys hanging around the title picture right now.
Who do you think is the best opponent for him to face next?
I liked the Ben Rothwell matchup. I thought that coming off the win over Overeem and him coming off the win over Bigfoot, I think it just makes sense. A lot of people like the Mitrione Rothwell matchup. So, I mean, Arlovsky, there's just a bunch of guys. There's just a bunch of guys at the top of the division just waiting to get matched up. So, I mean, there's basically anybody coming off a win at this point, I think, is fair game for Arlovsky, especially if they're in the top 15.
On the other side of that, of course, we have Bigfoot Silva in a losing effort. He is now 0-2 with 1 no contest, which was originally, I believe, a draw with Mark Hunt. In his last 3 fights, and that fight was, of course, overruled because of some performance-enhancing drug issues with Bigfoot Silva. Does he get one more fight in the UFC, or is this the end for him?
No, it's definitely, like I said, with a heavyweight division that's lacking a bunch of bodies and talent, I just don't see how they would get rid of him. The same with Overeem. They were talking about, they got to get rid of Overeem. No, there's no way. First off, he's a draw. Second off, he's a big name. And third off, again, there's nobody filling up the top end of the heavyweight division. If you're going to get rid of Bigfoot Silva, how are you going to keep around guys at the bottom of the division? Because Bigfoot's clearly superior, and so is Overeem.
Who of the winners on Saturday night performed most impressively, other than Andrei Arlovsky, of course?
Other than Andre Arlovsky, I thought that Santiago Ponzinibbio did a really good job. He knocked out Wendell Oliveira, who's I thought was going to be the better striker, and Ponzinibbio really crushed him on the feet. So I was really really impressed by him, and to have a guy like him, who he's the only Argentine fighter in the UFC. Maybe not as a marketing guy, but it's a step in the right direction, especially because they're moving into the South American and Latin American countries.
Can you spell Ponzinibbio?
Yes, I can. P-O-N-O. Wait, I'm sorry. I need a paper and pen to do it. P-O-N-Z-I-N-I-B-B-I-O.
Ponzinibbio. Follow-up question. Jessica Andrade, obviously successful in her campaign against Larissa Pacheco. I picked Pacheco to win based strictly on her impressive record. Does this call into question her previous experience and perhaps her position as a legitimate threat in the UFC Women's Bantamweight division, or does this say more about the threat that Jessica Andrade poses to that division?
I really don't know, to be honest with you. I think Pacheco just didn't look like herself in that fight. She never got comfortable. And remember, she's only 20 years old, so it's not like she's at the end of her pitiful road. She's got a long road ahead of her. And I think that she's going to have a very long tenure in the UFC. I think she just didn't look like herself. But I think Jessica Andrade has really showed herself to be a very underrated fighter. And again, Andrade is only 22 or 23 years old as well, so she's young and she's got a bright future. She's a little undersized for the division, but if she keeps performing like that, I don't see how they're going to be able to get rid of her. She's a good fighter.
It seems like not so long ago we had to wait several weeks in between UFC events because of some cancellations and things like that. We are now in the midst of an 8-week stretch that has at least one UFC event per week. That's pretty cool for MMA fans, and I guess a great time to start this midweek report because we've always got stuff to talk about. We had a Fight Pass card last weekend that we just talked about. This weekend we've got another Fight Pass coming up. This one from Saitama Super Arena in Saitama, Japan, famed former home of Pride Fighting Championship. Many great Pride events held in Saitama. This one is going to be headlined by former Pride, I guess, standout, certainly former standout in Japan via the K1 organization, Mark Hunt. Recent standout in the UFC for sure, taking on another guy who's had a long and successful career in the world of mixed martial arts. Of course, I'm talking about Roy Nelson. This card is pretty good, especially for a Fight Pass card. We've obviously got a headliner here that I think is pay-per-view worthy. Probably not headliner worthy, but certainly main card pay-per-view worthy, just given the success that these guys have had and the sorts of fights that they've put on. And looking further down the card, I think we've got a few that we can talk about here. So let's start with the headliner itself. We've got 6th-ranked Mark Hunt taking on Roy Nelson. This is one of my most anticipated fights of 2014, and I would guess most folks would agree as well, especially those who pay a lot of attention to the world of mixed martial arts. Mark Hunt has become obviously one of the more popular fighters in the UFC since arriving here a couple of years ago. He had his draw with Bigfoot back in December that was overturned, and then, of course, that spectacular knockout loss to Junior Dos Santos, which was one of the most unexpected results that I've ever seen. Nelson, on the other hand, has won all 7 of his wins in the UFC have come by knockout or technical knockout, and he has never been stopped. Has only lost by decision. I'm expecting a slugfest here, but my first question to you, Riley, is what % chance do you think that Nelson, who is a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt, takes Mark Hunt, who has been shown as being susceptible to submissions? What chance is there that Nelson takes Hunt to the mat on Saturday early morning?
There's a good chance. I think that Nelson knows that if he stays on the feet, he's going to be dealing with a lot of kicks and a lot of overhands and a lot of big punches. But we saw Mark Hunt, his takedown defense is improved vastly. We saw that in the Bigfoot fight. He was not giving up takedowns. Bigfoot's he's a big guy that's strong and can put you on your back. Nelson, I don't think, is as much of a natural takedown artist. Remember, he struggled to get Frank Mir to the mat. And then so it might just turn into a sloppy, all-out brawl, which sometimes is fun to watch, and I think it will be fun to watch. If Nelson does get him down, I think he can finish him, especially if he moves into that. He loves the mounted crucifix. I think that he would be able to finish him from there, especially with unanswered strikes, especially because Hunt isn't especially skilled on the ground.
let's look into the future a little bit here. You mentioned before the bottom-heavy nature of the UFC's heavyweight division. What do either of these guys have to do to earn a shot at Cain Velasquez's title?
Well, it's got to be a right person, right time. Everything's gonna be timing with this UFC title picture. And until Velasquez and Verdum fight, the whole division's in a stall right now.
Sure.
But again, it's not like a bunch of guys been floating to the top. So I mean, an impressive win is going to go a long way. If it's a sloppy crap win, and I would expect them not to be immediately in the title talks. But any top 10 win is a big win at this point.
We talked before about how Mark Hunt. Well, before we move on to the next fight, Riley, who do you have in this one? I think this one's actually kind of tough to predict. But
yeah, I agree. I think Roy Nelson's going to pull it off, but it ain't going to be easy.
Oh, man, I want to say Roy Nelson just because of what I said before, his submission prowess, but I have a really hard time betting against Mark Hunt. So I'm going to take him, and it's going to be by decision. And I think it's going to resemble the decision loss that Roy Nelson took to Junior Dos Santos, where he just got punched in the face a whole bunch of times, but he just refused to go down.
Cool.
Next on the card, another former Pride standout, Takanori Gomi, returns to the UFC lightweight division to take on undefeated 9th-ranked Miles Jury. When researching this fight, I guess Miles Jury, despite being undefeated, I guess for me has sort of been kind of an under the radar, but very much a standout fighter. Obviously undefeated not only in the UFC but professionally as well. He has notable wins, I would say, over Diego Sanchez and Michael Johnson, who has himself recently looked fairly impressive at lightweight. Gomi, meanwhile, a legend in Japan, thanks to his exploits in Shuto and in Pride, but only 4-4 in the UFC. Wins against guys who belong in the UFC, but certainly couldn't be confused for title contenders. Riley, who do you like in? I shouldn't even ask who you like in this one because I think the answer is fairly obvious. But assuming that Miles Jury can take out Takanori Gomi, who? And I know we're kind of leapfrogging here, but who do you think then he should fight next at lightweight? Or am I looking too far ahead? I'm sorry.
I think you're looking a little far ahead. Gomi's a scrappy veteran. I mean, I have Miles Jury personally. I think his ground game is just phenomenal. He was a guy that I pegged that was going to be a very, very good UFC prospect. I didn't know he was going to be this good that fast, but I knew he would be good. But he's grown a lot, especially since moving to Alliance MMA in California. I mean, that's been a huge move in his career. But I mean, if we're looking past Gomi, which I think his wrestling and his ground game, we don't have to, but we can look past him. You got to give him a top 10 guy. I mean, he's definitely earned it. You're right. The win over Johnson was big. The win over Sanchez was big. It was dominant and big. So, I mean, this is a guy that he's the youth of the division, and he's rapidly rising. And you can't hold him back if he gets a win here. You got to really throw him in the deep end at that point.
Yeah, I've got Jury winning by submission here. Just to sidetrack for a minute, Takanori Gomi was involved in probably my favorite fight of all time. That was his epic showdown against Nick Diaz, which Diaz won by, I believe, Gogo Plata submission, yes, which is very rare, but then it was overturned because Nick Diaz tested positive for some ridiculously high level of marijuana. Yeah. Riley, what is your favorite fight of all time, if you have one?
Oh, that's putting me on the spot there. I like
one
to go.
One that comes off the top of your head right away.
Yeah, the one that I can think of right off the top of my head, which is pretty much a consensus among a bunch of fans, would be Dan Henderson Shogun, who won. That fight was just awesome. Another one I can think about was Don Fry versus, I think it was that one Japanese guy. I can't remember his name off the top of my head, which is rare.
Where they just were hockey punching each other?
Yeah, it was. They just held each other at the back of their head and just swung. I mean, it wasn't anything technical, but it was just you couldn't look away.
Right.
I mean, off the top of my head, those are two that are really good ones.
Thank you very much.
Yep.
Next on the card, a welterweight fight between Yoshihiro Takayama and Amir Sadala, two guys that have been away from the octagon for quite some time. Akiyama came to the UFC. He won a controversial decision over Alan Belcher and then has dropped his last 4 fights. He hasn't fought since February 2012 and he lost to Jake Shields. Actually, the last time the UFC was in Saitama, Japan. Sadala, meanwhile, has had a similar layoff of about 2 years. His last fight was a loss to Dan Hardy in September of 2012. His most notable win, I think, was his first one He is one of the rare fighters who has fought his entire professional career in the UFC. And, of course, his first official win was over CB Dollaway, who is streaking right now. So, Riley, given the ring rust that could be present here, the fact that Akiyama has had a less than stellar UFC showing and that Sadala has kind of been a middling fighter, what can we expect out of this contest?
It's really hard to make a prediction on this one because you don't really know who's been hot and who's not. They haven't fought in a while.
Right.
I've always thought Amir Sadala is low-level UFC to potentially not UFC quality. I mean, if you look at his record, most of the guys he's beaten, it's just they haven't been, fairly notable in terms of UFC talent.
You're right.
As for Akiyama, I mean, other than the Vitor Belfort knockout, I think he's been very competitive in all of his fights.
Sure.
And he's a very good striker. He's got a very good chin. Don't let the knockout to Belfort fool you.
Right.
He's gonna have to ward off the leg kicks though, because Sadala throws a lot of leg kicks. So I think if he's able to maybe catch a kick and put him on his back, I think that his top game is good enough where he could just neutralize Sadala and beat him up.
I've got my prediction here is Sadala by decision ? Because again, just like you said, I think this one is kind of tough to predict. You're right about Akiyama. I'm remembering now his fight against Jake Shields when he had a couple sweeps where he just took Jake Shields went flat to the mat, and that's something you never see with Jake Shields because obviously he's such a skilled grappler. So
yep.
If he made a guy like Jake Shields do things like that, if he's able to at least kind of get a hold of Amir Sadala, I think it may be Akiyama's fight to win. Interesting match, not a lot of consequence to it, you know what I mean? Because if Akiyama wins, well, so what? And if Sadala wins, well, fine, he gets another fight in the UFC. But, potentially a good one for the Japanese crowd, that's for sure. Finally, and this one is obviously Riley, as one of the foremost authorities on women's mixed martial arts, and I say that without a hint of facetiousness and sarcasm.
Hey, thanks, man. That's nice of you.
We're going to talk about the women's bantamweight match between Miesha Tate, ranked number 2, versus the debuting Rin Nakai. Miesha Tate, obviously, she's got the losses to Ronda Rousey and the loss to Kat Zingano, and I think for the time being, anyway, she's probably been relegated to gatekeeper status while the UFC tries to, maybe churn out a few more legitimate contenders, if any could be considered that, to Ronda Rousey's title. Nakai, meanwhile, 16-0-1, 10 wins coming by stoppage. Brian Henderson and Vince Carey had some interesting things to say about this fight, and I encourage everybody to go to combatpress.com and check out their toe-to-toe prediction, not only of this fight but of the entire card. But their take on these fights was particularly interesting to me, being not as familiar with Rin Nakai, and I think I'm probably not uncommon among MMA fans in my unfamiliarity. Riley, of course, you being a likely exception to that. My first question is, if Nakai defeats Tate, unlikely as that may be, and especially if she stops her, where do you think this puts her in the women's bantamweight division? Because it would be her first fight in the UFC, but she would have defeated the second-ranked fighter in the division.
That shoots her pretty much into title contention. I mean, Tate, like you said, Tate's probably the third. She's probably right behind Kat Zingano in that third spot, in my opinion, in the women's bantamweight division. Nakai, first off, she's an easy sell because she's 16-0. So that's an easy sell when you put her up against Rousey.
Right.
But she's got to win first, and I don't know if she's wrestling or she's gonna be wrestling against a wrestler. Her and Tate are both wrestlers. Now, it depends whose wrestling is better. Nakai's has looked very, very good while fighting in Japan, but she has not fought the quality of opponents that Miesha Tate has fought. I think her highest quality opponents have been, Tara LaRosa, Sarah D'Olio, and Brenda Gonzalez. So I really don't think she's been fighting at a high level.
Right.
I think she's fought well against the people she's fought. She has very good wrestling. She has very, very scary arm locks. She has that Kimura. I talked to Tara LaRosa after that fight. Tara LaRosa didn't tap out, but she got her shoulder jacked up from one of those Rin Nakai Kimura attempts. But if this comes down to a striking battle, Miesha Tate's going to win because Rin Nakai is very green on the feet. She's a good wrestler, but she's not a very good striker. and that's one big advantage that Miesha Tate's going to have in this fight. So that's why I think that she's going to win. But if she's able to get Tate on her back, that will be scary because Nakai is very, very, very scary on the top.
I like Tate by decision on this one as well, but I think a more difficult fight to call than I think most, featuring a debuting fighter in the UFC. My last question for you, Riley, about this fight is this. If Ronda Rousey continues to hold the UFC women's bantamweight belt, will Miesha Tate ever get a chance at it again?
If she clears out the division, I think they could see that, and if she keeps winning, there's no way they can say no. I mean, if Rousey beats Kat Zingano, if they bring in Gina Carano, if she beats Betcha Koheta, if she beats whoever else comes that hasn't had an opportunity, and Miesha Tate goes on a winning streak, absolutely. That's a marketable fight because those two don't like each other. Rousey's a draw, and people like Miesha Tate. So I think from a business standpoint, it would make sense if under the right circumstances.
All right. Speaking of women's MMA, the first season of The Ultimate Fighter to feature an entirely female cast of fighters and introducing the women's 115-pound strawweight division debuted last week in what I thought was a pretty good episode, 2 hours on Fox Sports 1. To be honest with you, it was the first episode because my fiance has watched a number of seasons of The Ultimate Fighter with me, but this was the first one that she actually seemed to be sort of interested in. And I'm sure, it's because she sees herself as a woman in these female fighters, and I think perhaps the UFC can hope to call more female fans just because of that factor alone. What did you think of the first episode overall, especially in comparison to, I think, what people may have expected given the advertising?
It was all right. I didn't like that it was 2 hours and there was only one fight, so I was basically watching just to hear backstory. When I don't really, I don't care that much about backstory. What they usually do in an hour episode is you hear a little bit about both the fighters' fighting's background story, and that's fine. I like the little tidbits, but it was just a little too much background and bull crap. I would have liked to see 2 fights on the first episode, especially if it's 2 hours. If it was a 1 hour episode, one fight would have been fine. But it just to me it just dragged because it was just too much not fighting stuff, I guess.
We saw Randa Marcos defeat Tisha Torres in what I think many people thought was an upset, not only given the rankings, but just given Torres' own reputation. What chance do you think Marcos has to win this whole thing?
Well, I think wrestling is key in this season. A lot of the girls are kickboxers, so if you have good wrestling, that's a good tool to have this season. So the Carla Esparzas, the Randa Marcoses are gonna have a good time using their wrestling there. But you got to be a complete martial artist, and I might say wrestling's the tool here, but the most complete fighter is going to win this season. Because if you're only good at striking, you can be the best striker in the house, someone's going to take you down. You can be the best wrestler in the house, but if you don't have any striking, to set it up, you're not going to get any takedowns. So, with the Marcos Torres fight, obviously I was a little bit surprised that Randa won, but my criticism of Torres coming into the house, which was hard to make, was that I've never seen her fight a wrestler. We don't know how she would look against a wrestler. She's always fought strikers. And her fight against Rose Namajunas, it was a close fight. It was a close ground fight when it was on the ground. So having a top-heavy wrestler like a Marcos, or if she was to fight Carla Esparza, I think that was where she was going to struggle, and that's what ended up happening.
Rose Namajunas doesn't give a shit.
No.
Nope. That was almost funny watching her, because everybody's like clapping and being happy, and she's like stand there like this.
I like that though, and that's what Dana said. There's a Ronda Rousey coming out of this season. I have a hunch it's her based on attitude and the fact that they're advertising her a lot. So I think that she might go far, and that's just based on advertising.
There might be a Diaz brother coming out this season. From the looks of things. Let's see. Joanne Calderwood takes on Emily Kagan this week. In tomorrow's episode, Wednesday again at 10 Eastern Time on Fox Sports 1. What of each of these fighters, what is their number one strength and number one weakness?
Okay, for Calderwood, I think she, if not the best striker in the house, she's one of the best strikers in her house. Her Muay Thai techniques are phenomenal. Her clinch is nasty. Her knees and her elbows are very, very fluid. Um, her weakness, it's hard to say because we haven't seen a complete game out of her. So I mean, you could make the assertion that her ground is her weakness, but when you don't see it that much, it's hard to make that kind of assertion. So that's just kind of a question mark.
Sure.
Emily Kagan, I'd say she's a decent boxer. I think that her wrestling is what she needs to try and use here because again, like we said, we don't know much about Calderwood off her back. So I think Kagan's a very capable opponent. But she's got to stay away from the clinch. If she's going to get a takedown, she's got to shoot and get her down quickly because, like I said, Joanne's got brutal knees. She's got brutal elbows. She's showed that in all of her fights so far.
I think the world of MMA is fairly insular because we all just sort of talk to one another and I think make things seem more popular and anticipated than they maybe actually are. For example, this season of The Ultimate Fighter was projected by me, by a lot of other people, to actually get a decent amount of viewership, because of, honestly, the way the UFC marketed it. You were going to get sort of the people who were just interested in watching attractive women do anything. And then perhaps you were going to get, a new crop of fans who were interested in the product because of its unique nature. However, it came out after the first episode that the ratings were actually kind of low, somewhat disappointing. Riley, do you think that the ratings will improve over the course of the season, and what can the UFC do, if anything, to make those ratings improve?
We'll see. I was shocked that they were as low as they were, but it's The Ultimate Fighter. A lot of people maybe are just sick of The Ultimate Fighter. I don't know. Maybe that's what it is. Maybe some people are actually turned off by the fact that it's all women because, not to be sexist here, but women cause a lot more drama. And maybe people aren't trying to tune in to watch the drama. I don't know what the deal is, but maybe the 2-hour first episode, maybe there was something else in the time slot it went up against that other people were watching. I don't know what the problem was, but I for one was super shocked. I think they can pull their numbers up if the fights continue being as good as they are. The first fight was obviously good, so maybe it'll attract more viewers if the fights continue to be good.
First thing I'll say is that we've seen a lot of drama in the all-male seasons of The Ultimate Fighter, including people peeing in each other's food and shit. But also, I think you touched on something interesting, and I think that there's still a segment of the population that finds women fighting to be
off-putting.
Yeah, off-putting. Thank you very much. For whatever reason, I certainly understand not wanting to watch like an intergender fight because that would certainly be off-putting to anybody but the most heinous among us. But I think watching elite competition among any athletes is fantastic, and I think that same group of people would probably be the group of people who perhaps finds MMA just as a whole kind of off-putting. Sure. And to add the factor of like the so-called fairer sex battling each other and bloodying each other, obviously it goes against sort of the established gender roles here. So here's hoping that the ratings improve. But even if they don't, women's MMA is not going anywhere. No. I mentioned it last week. It's, I think, already the most popular women's sport in the United States. And I think the UFC is only going to continue making stars and, frankly, making rich women out of a lot of these female athletes. So, I think good on them for continuing to expand the women's divisions and contributing more to women's athletics overall. Taking a sidestep here, outside, I suppose, the direct world of MMA, disappointing news last week that former UFC welterweight contender and future opponent of Anderson Silva, Nick Diaz, has been arrested for suspicion of DUI, among other charges. I have to admit I was a little bit surprised when they described his arrest. They said he was arrested for suspicion of DUI and obstruction of justice for trying to dispose evidence. And I thought, well, DUI, he was, under the influence of something that wasn't alcohol and tried to throw that bag of that thing out the window. But apparently that was not the case. We've obviously seen John Jones, one of the biggest stars in the UFC, undergo similar circumstances, although he actually wrecked his car. Didn't seem to affect his career very much. Probably won't for Nick Diaz either, unless he happens to be unavailable from a legal perspective on the date of his scheduled Anderson Silva fight. Riley, my one question about this for you is if it was a fighter that was not as famous, not as renowned, not as able to draw people in to buy a pay-per-view as Nick Diaz, would that fighter still find himself with a UFC contract?
Possibly. It depends on the situation. I don't think DUI. I mean, in the past, I don't think it's caused too many professional athletes to lose their job. Even if you look at football, people are getting suspended for, spousal abuse or child abuse, but they get DUIs and they don't usually get actually slapped with a suspension or anything like that until like the second or third time it happens. So I don't think the UFC would do that. But you never know. I mean, it's a case by case thing. But you're right. The guys at the top usually get more preferential treatment because they're the ones that draw the money.
Do you think Nick Diaz actually makes it to the octagon to take on Anderson Silva in January?
100%. Yeah, he will be there.
I can't wait. A couple of fight announcements to talk about for the end of the show here. One that I'm really excited about. Third-ranked heavyweight Travis Brown takes on Brendan Schaub at UFC 181. It's going to be the third fight, or one of the fights on a card that features not only a middleweight title defense by Chris Weidman, but a lightweight title defense by Anthony Pettis. So that should be a hell of a good card. Early thoughts on this heavyweight matchup from you, Riley?
It's interesting. Yeah, they're both coming off losses, but Travis Brown is cracked himself into that top 5 ranking because he's just been wrecking everybody. And he had the loss to Verdum, but he was tough as nails in that fight. And I think that his power and his whole game is what's going to carry him here. And Brendan Schaub is very good too, but I just don't think he has the chin to stick around with Brown. Brown hits hard, and let's be honest, Schaub hasn't been known to take a great punch in his UFC career. So, I mean, that seems like a setup for Brown to get back on track here.
I just realized that this fight will be Brown versus Big Brown. Brandon Big Brown Schaub.
That's his name?
Is his nickname now.
Is it really?
It changed from the hybrid to Big Brown.
I did not hear about that. All right.
Yep. So Brown versus Big Brown, UFC 181. Really tempted to make a scatological joke, but this is a professional show, so we're going to avoid that. Well, the second one I want to talk about is Luke Rockhold versus Michael Bisping, coming up at UFC Fight Night 55 from Australia in November. Rockhold is ranked 5th in the UFC's middleweight division. Michael Bisping ranked 7th. Rockhold, of course, pretty well thought of in the UFC's middleweight division, if not for that loss that he took in spectacular fashion to Vitor Belfort. Again, Riley, early thoughts on this one, and follow-up question: would either of these? Early thoughts on this one. I'm sorry.
No worries. I mean, I love this fight. I love the animosity. I love the early trash talk. I love everything about this fight. It's a great stylistic matchup. They don't like each other, and it's on that Australian Fight Pass card, which, if you've seen the card so far, is not very strong because it's a Fight Pass card. But just the fact that this fight's on there, I'm tuning in. So I like the matchup. I wish they would do it on Fox Sports 1, but so be it. I'm excited.
What are the chances that Luke Rockhold gets pulled from this fight in favor? Let me rephrase. If Vitor Belfort is for some reason unable to make his fight against Chris Weidman in January, would you prefer to see Luke Rockhold fill his place or Jacare Souza?
Jacare. Jacare is getting ready. He's assuming that Vitor is going to pull out, so he's going to be ready, and I think he deserves it.
Thank you very much. That wraps up the MMA portion of our midweek report here at CombatPress.com. Once again, check out CombatPress.com for all the latest MMA news, interviews, opinions, all of the different things that you could want to know about the world of MMA. But finally, as has become our custom here, we're going to have ourselves a Wrestling Minute. Riley.
Well, I didn't really watch Raw last night. I didn't get a chance. I was busy, but I heard I didn't miss too much. So I'll talk about NXT TakeOver, and I won't steal your thunder on this one. I just wanted to talk about how awesome Kalisto and Sin Cara are
Oh
as a
yeah,
team.
dude.
Oh my God, Sin Cara is good. The former Unico, I loved him when he was Unico, but he's doing a good job as Sin Cara in NXT at least. But Kalisto, the former Samurai de Sol, he is unbelievable. I mean, he's a little undersized, but so is Rey Mysterio, and he does a
Yep.
lot of the stuff, if not better than Mysterio. Maybe not as good as Mysterio, but he does it very, very similar and very good. I really,
Totally
really like.
different stuff, like like
Right.
different specific things.
Right, he's just unbelievable the stuff he can do like that. He
Yeah.
did I don't remember if it was, I don't think it was an NXT takeover, but he got thrown off the ropes. He did a handstand walking, and then he walked backwards into like a Hurricane Rana or a Frankenstein or whatever you want to call it. I don't
Yeah.
want Scott Steiner getting pissed at me. Um, but that
Hurricane.
that team is awesome, and I love it, and I really hope within the next 6 months they get called up to the main roster because they're lacking luchadors up in there, and that they want to have them because of the merchandise they push, and the fact that fans like the lucha style. And
Right.
I think that they'd be a great team to have up there, especially with Unico as the veteran anchoring under the Sin Cara mask. I think he's a very technically sound wrestler. He can do American wrestling and he can do lucha, and I think Samurai Del Sol is the same way.
Lots of really great talent coming out of developmental in NXT. The most interesting thing of NXT Takeover, which by the way was one of the best wrestling shows that I've seen in quite some time, besides maybe the Ring of Honor show that I went to, just televised. It had AJ Styles versus Kyle O'Reilly, and then in the main event on television was the Briscoes versus the Young Bucks, who are currently New Japan Tag Team Champions or Junior Heavyweight Champions. Live, that was one of the most incredible experiences I've ever had, particularly in the world of pro wrestling, but just in general for a live show. But back to NXT TakeOver, the thing I found most interesting was how the crowd reacted, or rather didn't react, to Adrian Neville, especially in comparison to how the Raw crowd the previous Monday had reacted. They were all over the place with enthusiasm for what Adrian Neville had to bring to the ring. And I think it kind of speaks to the need for him to continue to develop himself as a professional wrestler, that, a handful of months after his debut and after his sort of rise to singles stardom in NXT, people are kind of like, yeah, Red Arrow, meh, no big deal. They've really kind of cooled to his tactics, and I still think they're incredible. I think anytime anybody can do a straight up shooting star press, that's incredible. But throw a 360 in there, and that's like, damn near impossible. So I'm excited to see what he does in the future, but I think that the fact that the crowd was so lukewarm to his presence and then his win is very telling. I think the other thing that it points to is their love for Sami Zayn. I think as soon as he gets pushed to the main roster, he's going to be a big star in the mold of Daniel Bryan, in the mold of kind of a nicer version of CM Punk, sort of that indie type of wrestler. So I think he's obviously established himself as a guy who the fans can really identify with in NXT, and I think that is probably even more so than I don't want to say the fact that they're sick of Adrian Neville's thing, but I think the fact that they like Sami Zayn that much had as much to do with their lukewarm or mediocre reaction to Adrian Neville as it did his need to kind of freshen up what he brings to the ring.
Do you think it had anything to do with, like, they kind of, in my opinion, I thought the match was unbelievable. I think they kind of screwed the finish up because they had Neville pull Zayn out kind of like in a heelish manner. Like, that didn't make any sense. Neville's a babyface unless they're trying to turn him, but I think that's why you got such a lukewarm reaction, was because it looked like Zayn was going to get the win, and then Neville pulled him out. I think unless they're going to turn him heel, which I think would be stupid at this point, if you want to pull Zayn out, you have Tyler Breeze or Tyson Kidd do it. I don't think that made sense to have Neville do it because it just makes him look like a bad guy. Unintentionally, in my opinion.
Sure. I think the thing that concerned me more wasn't so much the ending of the match, but like when he got to the ring, I thought the crowd popped way more for Sami Zayn.
Oh, I agree with that.
During the entrances, and I feel like they didn't really pop for Adrian Neville very much at all. And so that was really what concerned me more, particularly in comparison to how the crowd reacted to him at Raw. Because, I mean, obviously he can get away with doing the things that he's been doing in NXT for a couple months on the main roster because, not a lot of people watch NXT. So I think, especially live, people will be like, oh, what did I just see? But that's only going to last for so long. And I'm curious to see what he will do then to, continue to develop himself as a pro wrestler.
I think that the reason, here's why I don't like WWE in this respect. In this respect, they have the same matches all the time.
Yeah.
It's the same damn thing. They don't let them really. They have a wide variety of moves, but then you can't use this move. You can't move that move. And then they have what I hate the most is the sequence wrestling when they get their big move set in.
Yeah.
Like, it's like, okay, for example, Cena. I know the 5 moves of doom thing, but honestly, let's think that this is an actual competitive wrestling match. So he does the 2 shoulder blocks or the 3 shoulder blocks or whatever, and then every time the guy goes for the swinging clothesline, misses into the back suplex. It's like if you actually did a scouting report and this was a real competition, you would not go for the fucking clothesline. Like, how dumb is that? And like last night, I saw the Kane Jericho match before I had to leave, and every time Jericho's in a match, someone throws him over the top rope and walks away, and he walks to the top turnbuckle and hits him with the axe handle. It's like how does that happen every match? It's just the scripted, the over scripting of professional wrestling in the WWE level is killing the matches.
I agree, and that's why when we see one that totally goes outside of what we expect, it makes us cheer louder. But I agree that the WWE could use more variety in their day-to-day presentation.
Right, and I hate to say this, but it's going to happen to Roman Reigns too. He's done a very good job yes, but he did a very good job of adapting early on and adding moves to his arsenal. But now it's just, I like him and I want him to do really well. But the Superman punch. I mean, that's one of the pop ones, which is not a problem. But he does a move into a move, and then it goes into the basement drop kick onto the apron.
Yeah.
And then I don't know. And you can listen to Ole Anderson interviews about Ric Flair, and he's like, I love Rick, but he had the same match for a couple of years in a row, and it's just like, okay, what, you don't want to make any more money? He had the same match.
Right. One other point I want to get to on NXT TakeOver was the debut of Kenta.
Yeah.
Which obviously is very exciting. The one issue I have though is, and listen, I understand that the WWE needs to give guys trademarkable names that the WWE can trademark and then make money off of, and so they can't have Kenta go by his first name. But Hideo Itami seems almost unwieldy. I know it's only Hideo Itami, 6 syllables, but I feel like even for American fans it's going to be too much. Do you think that they've made a mistake in branding him? That's my question.
Okay, I've always hated the trademark names, especially recently, because the trademark names they have are generic, horrible-sounding names. I think when they build guys up on their own, I'm totally fine with them giving them a ring name. Like Mojo Rawley in NXT, that's a guy that they created. That's a guy that was not really an indie guy beforehand. He was a professional football player. If it's a guy that they build, go ahead and give him whatever name you want. When you take an indie star, like even Sami Zayn, I hate that name. I don't think he should be El Generico, but that name just sucks. But they signed all these top indie guys. They got Kenta, they got Prince Devitt, they got Kevin Steen. Those 3 guys should keep their names. What would CM Punk be CM Punk today if he didn't, fight to keep his name? No. Like if he came in with some generic name, it would have been stupid. That's why it didn't work for Colt Cabana. Colt Cabana became Scotty Goldman, and that wasn't when I was watching wrestling, but I saw that stuff, and I was like, if I was watching wrestling, then I wouldn't have liked him either, because he's not the guy that we came to know and love, which is Colt Cabana. So I especially with indie guys need to keep their names. It's that simple. Let's think of it this way. Randy Orton obviously has a lineage, but he came into the WWE as Randy Orton, the son of Bob Orton, the Cowboy Jr. Yeah. If he came in as, Randy Anderson or something stupid like that, it just wouldn't have worked.
Right. The main issue I have, and the main inconsistency that I see, is that Big E Langston is now Big E.
I hated that, by the way.
Antonio Cesaro is now Cesaro.
I hated that too.
Kenta, which was short, is now Hideo Itami. So they've given him like a longer, more unwieldy name and gone against what they've been doing with everybody else. So I thought they'd give him. I figured they'd probably give him a different name, but I thought it would be something like, another one-word type name, as opposed to like an actual first-last name type of thing.
Well, my deal with it is if you're going to advertise him in the weeks leading up to his NXT debut as Kenta, you're like, oh yeah, this big international star Kenta's coming, but we're going to change his name.
Right.
Okay, but if he's a huge international star, why would he have to change his name? His name's Kenta.
Looking forward to this, and maybe we're not looking forward in one sense, but looking forward calendar-wise to this weekend's Night of Champions event. What, if any, of the matches on the card do you want to watch? Do you want to see?
I honestly, I can't think of most of the matches off the top of my head, but I'm really not looking. I mean, maybe I'm not even looking forward to Reigns Rollins because they just had it on Monday Night Raw. So it's either they let Reigns win again and Rollins just looks like a chump, or Rollins gets a DQ win. Like, we haven't had enough of those already. It's just no win. And if they would have done the Rollins-Reigns and had Reigns win without having it on Monday Night Raw and he won at Night of Champions, that's a different story. But there's just no win there. The Jericho Orton match, could care less. Seen them wrestle a million times. Trying to think of the other matches. Cena, Lesnar, don't care. I like Lesnar. I've never been a huge fan of Cena, so I don't care. The women's match, it's probably going to be murky, even though I do think if it was a straight Paige versus AJ match, I'd watch it, but I don't like the Bellas. I think they're awful, so I don't want to watch them.
Let me talk about two matches that I'm actually looking forward to that you have not mentioned. The first is the Tag Team Championship match between Usos and Goldust and Stardust, but that's only because I'm a huge Cody Rhodes mark. And then the second one is Sheamus versus Cesaro for the U.S. title. And that's primarily because Sheamus is my lady's favorite wrestler, and Cesaro is one of my favorite wrestlers. So any opportunity we get to playfully talk crap to each other, it's always a good time in the Reinert Underwood household. So,
right, and actually, when you say that, I actually would love to see Sheamus and Cesaro because that's going to be a great match.
Yeah.
And I would watch them fight, once a week on TV if I had to, as long as they, kind of mix their stuff up. But when you get that match, you're gonna get a physical match, and that's what people like. That's why Ring of Honor has a cult following, because they're always physical matches. Cesaro Sheamus will be a great match. Now, that being said, I'm not excited for the tag team title match, but
agree to disagree. Check out all the latest in the world of mixed martial arts, once again, at combatpress.com. News, interviews, and opinion. Every fight has a story. Thanks once again to Rob Tatum and Brian Henderson, our bosses at combatpress.com, for keeping this show going. That's about all I have to say for this week. Riley, update on the giveaway.
Well, I've actually lost like 4 Twitter followers this week. So I'm about, once we get to 1 million, we'll give the giveaway. But at this point, I need 999,766, I think, something like that.
Get on it, people on Twitter. Follow.
It's gonna be a great giveaway.
I'm gonna put Riley on the screen right here. Follow Big Riles MMA on Twitter. Follow me, Reinert Eric, on Twitter, and follow all of our friends at Combat Press @Combat Press. Once again, visit combatpress.com for all the latest in the world of MMA. That's gonna wrap things up for this midweek report. I'm Eric Reinert for Riley Contact. Thank you very much, and enjoy the fights.